I'm Greg Sando. I am sitting here with Paul Boulian, who has something, I don't know, Paul, something a little bit dramatic, a strong statement about where you think orchestras are and what you think they should do. But maybe to start with, Paul, I know you as a consultant, and you could say a little bit about who you are and what you do,
Be happy
so
to.
people understand why you have the standing to say what you're going to say. I know you, I'll just start it off like this, as a consultant who's done productive work with the Pittsburgh Symphony, the St. Louis Symphony, and the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, although I'm sure that's only the beginning, and you work outside the orchestra world as well.
I do. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
You obviously set some high expectations right from the beginning.
Look, I know you, Paul, so I think the expectations are justified.
Well, I'd like to start just by thanking you and polyphonic.org for this. I was on the board of SOI for quite a number of years.
Symphony Orchestra Institute.
Symphony Orchestra Institute.
Predecessor in many ways to Polyphonic.
Predecessor to
Publisher,
this. So for me, this
Harmony
is...
magazine.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for me, this is a continuation of that work.
Yeah.
So I really feel good about that. I guess what I'd say is I'm probably a pretty unlikely person to be sitting next to you. And the reason
we were scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. I'm an industrial consultant.
Right.
I have been doing that for over 30 years.
Yeah.
I got involved in this industry, in this field, through one of my clients who was on the board of an orchestra. Mm-hmm. And that was now 15 years ago.
And which orchestra?
That was the Hartford Symphony. Okay. They had just come off 2 very lengthy work stoppages. And I worked with them for almost 4 years, helped negotiate 2 contracts, worked with them on a strategic plan, and that led to work with the Symphony Orchestra Institute, and I was invited by Paul Judy, who founded the SOI, to join the board. I worked very closely with Fred Zanone, who was a past chairman of ICSOM for almost 5 years, consulting to various symphonies, including Philadelphia, Baltimore, Toronto, and a number of others, including the ones you mentioned. And so I have been spending about 25 to 30% of my time since 1992, 93, working in this field.
Well, before we get to the allegedly dramatic statement, how did the orchestra field strike you when you came to it from the outside?
Well, I might say a few things. One, I'm not a musician.
Right.
And it became first a curiosity because of the complexity that I found in beginning when I first began doing this work. It's a multi-party system with boards, staffs, musicians, music directors, a public, and I found that to be very challenging from an organizational standpoint. How do you deal with an organization that has so many varied interests? How do you help them learn what their shared interests are and how they begin to work together towards those shared interests?
It's interesting that you included the public in that. The public, the audience, and then more widely, the people in the orchestra's community, whether or not they go to concerts. These are not often included among the orchestra's core constituencies.
Right, and I think one of the things that I bring to this because of my industrial background is the customer always comes first.
Just what I was thinking.
And the customer is always right.
Right. Any commercial firm in the business of selling products knows that. You have to put the customer first, or else you don't sell anything.
So my way of coming at this has always been from the outside in versus the inside out. My first question always is, what does the customer want? What's the customer telling you? What's the customer saying to you? And I found it both challenging and curious that I ended up having work with in a field where it seemed as though the customer often was secondary to many of the people in the institution.
To my experience, orchestras put their mission first. Our mission is playing this great music.
Right.
And the fear is that if you start putting the customers front and center, the audience, people. These people won't want to hear the great music. They're going to want to hear some watered down version of it. And now you will be dumbing down your product. You'll be failing your mission. And so somehow you have to put yourself in the impossible position of doing something that you think is important, whether anybody's going to come or not. And then if people don't come, you're really screwed, of course.
And unfortunately, I think that a number of orchestras are moving down that path. They haven't found a way to reconcile what the message the public is trying to send. And I'm not even clear what that message is, to tell you the truth, because I'm not sure that anybody really understands the message. I don't understand it. What I do know is what I see, but I don't yet know root cause. And that was one of the things that I thought we might talk about today is what are some of the root causes of what we see going on? Because when I work in my industrial world, most of the time we spend when we see markets declining and share being lost, we immediately try to understand what the root cause is of those events.
So when you talk about the orchestra world and you talk about what's going on, you mean markets declining and share being lost?
And I think it would be useful to understand the perspective that I come from. I've only worked with one ROPA orchestra, regional orchestra. All of the rest of the orchestras that I've worked with are the larger orchestras in this country. So when I speak about this, I'm really speaking about the orchestras that have budgets in the $5 to $30 million, $35 million range. So my perspective is always from orchestras that are in relatively large cities and have significant financial and audience challenges on a very large scale.
Right, which by this time are very well known about, or talked about in other interviews we've done here. It's really not a surprise that there's competition to sell tickets, that subscriptions are declining, that you can't take for granted that the audience is going to come to sort of worship at the orchestra's mission.
Right.
So, maybe that's the time to introduce what I've been talking about as your dramatic point.
Well, I don't know if I have a dramatic point. I have been spending a lot of time really trying to understand what is driving some of what we see.
Right.
And I have actually been spending more time ruling out things than ruling things in. For example, I'm not convinced that there is a significant audience problem.
In terms of that there are not people out there who want to come to the orchestra.
Right. I believe that I think there are data that show that there are many people interested in coming. So that, I partially began to reach that conclusion by doing some analysis of pricing and subscriptions over the last 20 to 25 years in a number of large orchestras. And lo and behold, I'm sure this is well known, if you start looking at the correlation between price increases and subscriptions, they're inversely related. The
higher the price is, the fewer people subscribe.
Absolutely. And in some orchestras, the correlation or the relationship is absolutely 1-to-1. For almost every dollar lost, you lose 1% of subscribers. So, I mean, I start looking at...
Wait, you mean for every dollar
the price increase, increase,
you lose 1% of subscribers.
So I began...
So there's an actual mathematical relationship that you can trace.
Oh, absolutely.
Which helps to rule out something that some people will say, oh, the prices have been increasing over a time when subscriptions are declining for other reasons.
No,
so it just happens to be parallel but not related.
We can't prove causation, but I'm beginning to believe there's causation. And the reason I am is that with several of the orchestras that I am working with right now, we have been testing certain kinds of pricing plans. And what we have seen, St. Paul is a good example. Now, they're not a symphony orchestra, but there's an ability
they're a chamber orchestra.
They're a chamber orchestra.
But they face the same problems as anybody else.
They have significantly changed their pricing. They have reduced the cost of subscriptions, and they're selling out many of their venues. They're selling out many of their venues. If you look at Baltimore, and what they've done in the last year.
Yeah, they're the poster child in the last year for price reduction.
They're the poster child, but what's happened in terms of subscriptions? If you look at Pittsburgh in terms of they didn't actually reduce their price itself, but they increased the number of concerts they gave for the same price the previous year. They've seen an increase in the number of subscriptions.
Why don't we pause for a second and run down for people what Baltimore has done, in case there are some who are not familiar.
You may be able to speak better to
No, I
that,
don't have it in my mind. Are we both going to be caught embarrassed on video talking about this wonderful thing and we can't offer specifics?
Well, if I understand, they've offered seats at $25 a piece to all comers.
Yeah, yeah.
And their house is much more full than it was.
Right. And they did that, what was it, for next season, when next season's tickets went on sale.
Right.
They announced that.
So,
and of course they have an exciting music director.
Right. So, you know, I've sort of stood back from that, and I've said to myself, Knight Foundation basically says there's a large part of the population that listens to classical music. There's a very small percent that attends. With several of the other orchestras I've worked with, I've looked at the level of saturation in the marketplace. Some of them have saturated the upper middle class, upper class, educated segments completely.
When you talk about saturated, what do you mean?
In other words,
sold as many tickets as they could?
They probably have sold almost as many tickets as they could sell.
Right.
And that in some cases, with one orchestra I am working with today, our calculation is that about 10% of the total population, adult population, has subscribed over the last 10 years.
In what size city is that?
About 800,000.
Subscribed in the past 10 years. But not all at one time.
No, not at all one time. So if you begin thinking about it in those terms, then you say to yourself, what's driving people away? And my conclusion, to a very large extent, has been the economics are driving people away and the value proposition.
Right. The economics meaning it costs too much and you don't get enough.
It's, I guess the way I would look at it, again, I'm no expert in the field, but I take this from my other work. The people, I believe, are demanding a different kind of experience. And as that experience has changed over the years, that demand has changed. The orchestra field has not moved its experience very much. And therefore the value proposition changed for people relative to the orchestra field. And pricing, as it has gone up, complementary to that, the experience and the breadth of the experience and the depth of the experience hasn't changed. And therefore the proposition is not as good anymore. And so my choice is, if I need to spend $150 to $200 for a household to go to a concert, and I look at that expenditure against many others, there are fewer people who view that as valued as they did previously. So I don't know exactly what that all means. I don't know if it's fact. I don't know if it's true. But as I look at all the data I've seen, both anecdotal and statistically, I've reached the conclusion that the value that the orchestra field generally is bringing to people has declined over the last 10 to 20 years.
The value as perceived by the people who do go and might go.
That's right.
But maybe particularly the ones who no longer go or don't go at all.
Right. Because if I look at the orchestras have a significant retention problem, especially with first, second, and third year subscribers. I mean, it's running between 40 and 60% for those three groups. That, if you think about the cost of capturing a new customer, which is basically what the orchestra field needs to do constantly, that cost is prohibitive.
and probably rising. And you know,
Yes.
I have been told many times that the retention rate of single ticket buyers is just shocking. Jim Underkoffler, who runs the Philadelphia Orchestra, was sitting in that chair yesterday when we did an interview with him. Now, that may have nothing to do with the sequence in which these things get onto polyphonic, but he was here, and he said that the vast majority, and I've heard figures like 70% of their single ticket buyers only come once.
Right.
Which means they have a huge churn every year, a turnover of single ticket buyers.
Right.
So let me step back from what you're saying, and everybody, this is the dramatic announcement that I was teasing Paul that he had to make, and I think it is very dramatic. Okay, fact number one, which we haven't stated explicitly, but we know, and I think many people know, which is that the cost of orchestra tickets has risen for the last generation a lot faster than the inflation rate.
2 to 3 times.
2 to 3 times.
I have run that analysis on about 7 or 8 orchestras now, and in every case, it's 2 to 3 times, closer to 3 times the inflation rate.
Right, and you also are convinced, partly through analysis, partly through the seat of your pants, that pricing. High prices deter people from coming, which, by the way, is the simple law of supply and demand that works everywhere. But here, I was saying earlier that some people might say, oh, there's a long-term trend because of competition from other forms of art and entertainment and changes in buying patterns, last-minute decision-making for people not to subscribe, and that somebody might argue prices have increased at the same time that other social factors have made subscriptions go down. But I think the reasons you say that may not be so are, number one, you can trace an actual mathematical correlation between a dollar's rise in subscription cost and a % of people who no longer come. And secondly, which I think is obvious enough but needs to be stated, that you observe that if orchestras cut their prices, suddenly people buy more tickets.
Right.
So there, analytically and anecdotally, it seems like there really is a relation, and the high prices are keeping people
If we
away.
believe that there is a significant % of the population that has affinity to classical music, then what prevents them from attending? They've already established they appreciate the product. So what is it about the experience that we are providing them? What is it about the conditions that we're setting for them to attend? That's
right.
where I begin coming to a point of saying there may be some problems with the product and the experience. Yes, I'll grant that. But we also have data that show that when I decrease the price, people begin to respond. I wouldn't expect that if there were significant problems with the product.
So now many little Pandora's boxes or large ones start to open.
That's right.
One of them would be the Baltimore Symphony reduced its ticket prices. They had funding to cushion the budget impact of that. Similarly, the New York City Opera here in New York has had good luck lowering ticket prices to $25 for the entire house. They have funding to cushion the budgetary impact from that. Marketing directors always say, in my experience anyway, that when you lower ticket prices, you may sell more tickets, but you make less at the bottom line than you would have if you didn't lower the prices and sold fewer tickets.
Right.
So that it sounds to me, and I think you've said this to me, in fact, off camera on other occasions, that there is a financial structure that orchestras are locked into,
right,
which prevents them from lowering ticket prices unless they found some funding source to offset that, which would not be possible in the long run.
Right. I think there's 2 factors. One is, I think there is a problem with the financial structure. And I know that many people in the field, believe that someone saying this outright is near heresy, right? Because it has some really significant implications for compensation of musicians, staff, artists, music directors, But I believe that there's another problem that I think helps address the question of lower ticket prices. And that is, there are many factors in the orchestra field that drive commitment of subscribers and attendees down, not up. And what I mean by that, and let me give you an example.
You're talking about commitment, which is partly tangible and partly intangible.
That's right. That's right.
Tangible in the sense that it makes them come more often,
and they
but
provide more
intangible,
revenue.
they donate more.
Absolutely.
They become involved as volunteers.
Absolutely. Give you,
and they talk about it to their friends. They get excited. They become advocates in the community. All these things.
If you think about what drives commitment of people to organizations, there is an ongoing attention to those customers in terms of providing them with added value services over time. There are activities that take place relative to those people that help them understand and appreciate that when they're given a choice, they always choose us. And that, to me, is the fundamentals of what we call symbiosis. There's a mutually interdependent relationship between the parties. When I look at the way this field engages its donors and audiences, what I see are organizations, in many cases, that have fundamental beliefs and practices that drive commitment down, not up.
That is a very strong statement.
Yeah. So
Can you give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example. In the last 15 to 20 years or slightly more, there's been advice to this field that has said you can't renew subscriptions. It's very hard to do it. So what we should and that people need choice. They have more opportunities and options, and therefore we should give them increasing flexibility. And by giving people increasing flexibility, what we do is we drive them into only those places where they really want to be. And one of the things that's created is the cyclicality or this capacity variation in concerts to some degree. That is, some concerts are completely sold out and others are nearly empty. Well, when you think about that from a commitment standpoint, what I want to build with people is a commitment to the total product, not to a part of the product. And so when I give people more choice, what does that drive them to ask for? What it drives them to ask for is fewer and fewer concerts in a subscription package. I only want to attend those concerts that completely appeal to me. So what we've seen over the last 20, 25 years are average seats in a subscription going from 13, 14 or more down to, in many cases, 3, 4, or 5. Well, now, if you think about that in terms of capacity that's available, it's much harder to fill capacity today, and I need many more subscribers. If you just think about that on a broad scale, the amount of commitment of the people that I have is completely reduced in general. So I look at this and I say to myself, well, if what I'm trying to do is increase the affiliation of people to the orchestra world, I need to increase the number of contact points they have, not decrease it.
And the fascinating thing about this to me is that it shows that orchestras have learned only one lesson from looking at the wider commercial world. They think that the lesson from the wider commercial world is that you can only give people what they're willing to buy, which is the frightened lesson. Whereas the other lesson from the commercial world is you have a new product and you go sell it to them.
Absolutely.
And it may be something they never dreamed that they wanted. But you think, oh, people are going to want this.
Right.
And then you go out and you convince them. So orchestras are in effect saying, if I hear you correctly, and if I interpret you correctly, they're saying, oh my God, we're so scared people might not want to come. So we're going to make it so easy. Look, you don't have to come 7 times.
Right.
You can come twice. And you can pick the stuff that you really like.
Right.
Rather than saying, you know what? We're doing this because we have something that we think is powerful and exciting and valuable.
Right.
And you should come to all of it.
Right. That's right. And we haven't figured out how to create receptivity to the complete product.
Yeah.
So that's the artistic problem I think we have, is that we have a very broad product, but we've permitted people to be very selective in how they partake of that product. And as a result, it's permitted them to reduce their commitment. Now, one of the things that I have been doing with several of the orchestras that I'm working with is that from my industrial experience, one of the concepts that we use from a marketing standpoint is called annuity-based relationships. That is, what you want to do with your customer is develop a guaranteed cash flow from that customer over the long term. So, give you an example. Diesel engine manufacturer with whom I've worked with several. We not only want to sell them the product, we want to sell them the parts for the life of the product, we want to sell them all their service, we want to sell them any modifications in the product, and we want to guarantee that they will have that relationship with us, and that our guarantee in return is that we will provide that in a timely, cost-effective way for them. So now I take that concept and I look at the orchestra world. And I say, well, how does the orchestra world work? It is on a one-year cycle time frame. It's not annuity-based. We're hoping every year that people are going to continue to subscribe and continue to contribute. So one of the things that what I've tried to do is to bring a concept to some of the orchestras with which I'm working that basically says we need to create a mutual investment relationship between our patrons, primarily households, and ourselves. And that needs to take the form of mutual guarantees. We guarantee certain experiences, we guarantee certain services, and they guarantee certain income to us over time.
Okay, devil's advocate question. Mm-hmm. Some people might say that an orchestra is more in a consumer market than an industrial market.
Absolutely,
that a proper comparison is more like selling Coca-Cola or selling a movie or selling something that people just go out and buy maybe once or maybe over and over again, but not something that they're going to be using constantly and now need to maintain like a diesel engine.
So that is maybe true for some percent of patrons and households. But there is a sizable proportion in every major orchestra of people who have subscribed 5, 7, 10, 15 years.
And who are giving money on
and
a
who
regular
are giving
basis.
And who are contributing on a regular basis. And the question for me to these orchestras has been, how do we bring more people into that group? How do we build a long-term reciprocal relationship with people as they begin to develop a connection to the field?
That brings me to the second big Pandora's box I think you opened here. Traditionally, the orchestra world has thought to itself and said out loud, of course we know why we exist. We are playing great music. The great music we play is the reason why people come. It's the reason we're here. It's the reason we're valuable to our city. So what do you mean we need to enhance the experience? Are we offering a uniquely valuable experience which all by itself is all anybody ought to need?
You know, again, I'm not an expert at any of this. I come at this through a certain set of eyes from my primarily industrial experience, but now from 15 years experience watching this industry. And my work is not just with management. It's been work with boards, musicians, and staff. It's involved work on negotiating internet agreements for the whole country, audio-visual agreements. It's involved work with the Mellon Foundation and the Orchestra Forum. And what what I see from this is, and just my own personal experience, is that we are becoming a more multi-sensory society, and we're becoming more diverse from a ethnic and population standpoint. And those two factors, in my mind, in common, require a change in the nature of the kind of experience that we bring to people. If my expectation is, and I'm becoming more acculturated to a multi-sensory experience, then we have a responsibility as a provider, a supplier in this field, to find ways to provide that more multi-visual, multi-sensory experience.
So
what I do understand is there's an issue or a problem here in my mind. And I think that it requires effort of board, staff, musicians, music directors, soloists, experts in terms of how people are engaged to work together to find
So I
this.
understand your caution.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I would have to say, as somebody listening to this, that when you propound as strong a problem like that, you say, here we have a really huge problem that has to be addressed. Someplace pretty soon after the question is asked, somebody has to start suggesting answers. So in the orchestras you've worked with, does this get discussed? And do people come up with ideas?
Yes, I think it's getting more discussed. I think that work that the Orchestra Forum has done around the concept called entry points, that is how we increase receptivity of audiences to a classical music experience, is being discussed more and more. Again, I think that all the orchestras that I have worked with around these topics are struggling with this, because I don't think anybody wants to go to where you suggested mood lighting and screens and fireworks.
Well, you know, I suggested those things because they're talked about a lot,
Yeah,
and
that's
sometimes
right.
people do them.
What, you know, I reached a couple of conclusions when I looked at some of the work, and I think the Knight Foundation funded a number of experiments in the industry. Is that correct?
Yes.
You know, and I looked at that and I say to myself, you know, if I'm in the industrial world and we have a new product launch, we might project a 3 to 5 year startup.
Oh, yeah. Now,
And so I look at that, and people in this field say, well, gee whiz, if it didn't succeed after 3 tries.
and 3 tries, they're lucky if they give it 3 tries.
Right.
Now, you mentioned the Knight Foundation project. This was called The Magic of Music. It existed over 10 years, and there's a final report, something with a title that includes the phrase shining eyes, that you can read on their website.
Right.
And the fault of this report, to me, is that it doesn't substantiate its conclusion. Its conclusion is, oh, look, they tried all these different things and none of them worked.
Exactly.
So, none of these things was tried for very long.
Right.
As usual, and I'm sorry, this is as usual in my experience of this orchestra world that we are talking about, they try something that seems very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and promising, and after a couple of years it turns out to cost more money than it makes, and you can't judge any tangible result from it. That is, more people are buying tickets to your regular concert.
But let's understand, let me just speak to a couple of things you said. One, it's very hard. No one ran an experiment. Let's start there.
No, nobody did that.
No one ran an experiment, because at the same time these things were being tried, ticket prices were increasing, other things were going on, which we know have an impact on the number of subscribers. So I can't say that a true experiment was run here. You know, over the years, my wife and I have attended opera for, you know, on and off for a long time, and his super titles and his, you know, his titles behind seats, were those gained high receptivity the first day it happened?
No. But in the longer run, it's been fabulous.
It's been fabulous. It's been fabulous, and it creates a connection of me as a patron of the art to the art, and it answers questions that I couldn't have answered before very easily without a lot more work. And most of us aren't willing to put that work in. So I come back to the classical music field and I say to myself, how do I know, based on the experimentation I've heard about, or the testing of ideas, because I think it was testing, that those will or will not work? I don't think we know.
We don't, and the testing is almost never done.
Right.
The ideas are tried, somebody believes in them deeply, they go and do it, but they haven't, for example, talked to people in the audience beforehand to see what their reaction is likely to be. You don't have a real product launch.
I have asked with the orchestras that I work with how often they engage with their patrons and their non-patrons around understanding them. And the answer I invariably get is, we ran a focus group 2 years ago with 12 people, or we ran 2 or 3 focus groups. And I say to them, again, coming from the world I live in most of the time, we're engaging with customers every day. We are asking questions every day. We are doing customer surveys every day. We want to know how the customer's view about our products are trending, because we want to be able to spot problems before they become so serious we can't do much about them. In this industry, we engage a few people at a time. We primarily ask questions of those who love us.
And then, by the way, we pat ourselves on the back because the survey shows that people love us.
Right. And the problem is the data shows that they're leaving in droves.
Yeah.
And so I look at that, and I've said to a number of the orchestras with which I work, why don't you have focus groups done by your employees? Forget about the outside consultants. Call people up, ask them if they will meet with you at the end of the concert or before, or both, every concert, and have discussions with them about their experience. You can stratify that. You can have some people who are single ticket purchasers. You can have people who have subscribed 1 or 2 years. Some people who have been there 10 years. You could do this on an ongoing basis, and as a result of that, you would have much better intelligence and be better informed about what people think.
You know, in order to do that, I'm certainly not saying you're wrong. I would support that 1,000%. In order to do it, you have to know how to do it. Now, an orchestra that you and I know has done some work with having discussions after concerts involving members of the audience. My perception is that they started off really well. They were kind of hot. They were promising. The people in the audience really loved having the conversations. But after a while, as it became more the usual thing and less the new and unexpected thing, it just became a comfortable little thing for the same people, more or less, every time to come back and schmooze after the concert. The orchestra didn't strategize it as a long-range plan to get information and build a relationship.
Right.
They really didn't know where they wanted to go.
What you're describing is a failure in implementing this effectively.
Yes, because it really wasn't strategized right in the first. And also, but to be fair, the orchestra doesn't have people who are even used to thinking about this, let alone doing it.
That's true. But we do have, this industry has extremely bright people in the staff areas and musicians, extremely bright, and board members.
Although their time is a problem. They are working, to about 110% of their capacity anyway.
This is a classic problem that I think we see in organizations in general. When people are operating out of incomplete information, out of faulty assumptions and beliefs, they create work for themselves, because they end up chasing activities and executing tasks that they shouldn't be doing in the first place. So I guess what I would say is that, yes, people are stressed and many people in this field are overworked, but part of the reason for that is not just staffing. It's that there is not the kind of focus an understanding of what they're trying to do, so that they are, in a sense, rifle shooting targets versus blasting them across the board,
Right.
which takes much more effort in my mind, and it gets much poorer results.
Looking at it just from a more global point of view, okay, they don't have this skill set as yet, and they are up against the wall for good or bad reasons in terms of their workload. But nevertheless, if they are, as you're describing, losing their core supporters, then they have to do something.
They have to.
They simply do, and it doesn't matter what the obstacles are.
Right.
They'll go out of business if they don't do these things. I will tell you what I think the experience should be, just in a general way. I think things like video screens and mood lighting may or may not be effective in certain situations, but I think that's the icing on the cake at best. The core experience is playing the music, and I think they should play the music better. Now, when I say that, there's going to be an uproar, maybe, because it's as if I'm saying American orchestras don't play well. And as a matter of fact, they play wonderfully by the usual standards of the business. But the usual standards of the business don't actually include on the edge of your seat commitment that is visible and audible.
Right.
So that when you come, and when I talk about myself as somebody who loves this music and goes to concerts, I go and I see the people on stage, the orchestra members, noodling their music before they play, and I don't see a bunch of people, and this includes when they do finally play the music, I don't see a bunch of people who are eager, who are consumed with the desire to do something for me.
Right.
They're playing the music and they may be playing it expertly, but it's a little bit detached.
Right. Right. Right.
And considering now that they're doing, in the case of a large orchestra, many concerts during a year, with a variety of conductors, some more effective than others, it might be a lot to ask that they give everything they can every time. Now, I can think of an example. I'm friendly because they commissioned a piece for me and performed it recently with the orchestra in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They just did Mahler's Second Symphony, a huge, overwhelming work that had never been done in Sioux Falls. They're also an orchestra that's not fully professional, and their conductor, Delta David Geyer, gets them to play better than many people would think they would be able to. So I'm told, I wasn't able to be there, but I'm told this performance was overwhelming. And the audience was overwhelmed and was on their feet cheering. There's an example of doing a piece like that for the first time in a city. Obviously, it's a peak experience for everybody. And it's going to be hard to ask the Pittsburgh Symphony or the New York Philharmonic or the Pittsburgh Symphony to do that every time. And yet they have to do something every time. They do.
I guess, I'm gonna walk out on another limb here. I'm not sure that the solution is completely in the concerts delivered. The orchestra field has defined itself as a sort of a limited event delivery system. And I think that may be, how do I say this? It may have inherent in it increasing obsolescence in our society. And that it may be that the purpose needs, or the process of the field needs to move from delivery to customer service and community relationships. I'm not sure that the solution is solely in the delivery of the product. I believe that it's partially in how to weave the orchestra into a fabric of a community much more deeply than it has been.
I have a friend who, like you as a consultant, who comes from outside the orchestra world, and he has found himself enmeshed in some orchestra situations, and he sometimes just rolls his eyes at it. But one of the phrases he's come up with is, an orchestra should think of itself as the house band for its city.
Yeah. I think that there are opportunities that present themselves in communities that, because the orchestra thinks about itself as a concert delivery system in a hall, they fail to recognize the opportunity that's in front of them. And as a result, they don't achieve the exposure in the community that they could.
One thing that I've toyed with is kind of zero-based definition of an orchestra. You start with the fact that you have a group of musicians who play these instruments. Now, what could a group of people like this mean to the city that they're in?
Absolutely. And the reason I raised this when you were talking about the concert experience is that I don't believe that the solution, again, is solely in the concert experience. I think that people have a relationship with an organization for a variety of reasons. It's not just because of the music. It may be that that relationship is because they believe that that institution is critical to their community, that it's critical to lifestyles, and that a community requires this cultural institution as part of its fabric, and that they don't attend because they love the music, and they don't give because of that. And we know that some people don't attend because of that and don't give because of that. They give because of its relationship. But that leads me to begin to raise questions about whether the subscriptions and concert attendance can actually be enhanced significantly without becoming more woven into a community and more essential to the community, and catering to the diversity that's growing in our cities. I mean, you could say that one of the reasons that we have some of the issues that we have, not only because of the pricing models, is because of the diversity that's growing in the cities and the fact that some of the repertoire does not appeal or is not connected as well to some of these more diverse groups.
So now, for a really interesting and I think dramatic example of something that an organization could do, this is not an orchestra, this is an opera company, the Houston Grand Opera.
Mm-hmm.
They face many of the same issues,
Right.
and they look around Houston and they say, what do we mean to this city? And they also notice that Houston has many ethnic communities that they have no contact with.
Right.
So now they have commissioned pieces from composers, which may not be operas, but are going to involve musicians from the ethnic communities and are aimed at their concerns. Right. And they're involving, in one case I know, one of the top composers in this country, a young guy who writes very appealing music and is really happy to work. I think in his case it's the Vietnamese community, and forgive me, Chris Theophanides, who's the composer involved in the Houston Grand Opera, if I'm mangling the details. But every time I've heard about this or talked to people involved in it, it just seems to me so far-reaching. And what it does not mean, by the way, is that the Houston Grand Opera is going to stop doing the kind of operas it has always
Right.
done. But it's going to take on a different resonance in the community. They may mean, possibility one, that people come to the regular operas who never came before. Especially since when David Gockley ran it, and I hope that the current management is considering, is continuing this, at times they would set up large video screens outside their theater so anybody walking by or driving by could see and even stop and watch. But so that's one possibility. More people come to the stuff they do. Possibility two, they develop and affect another product line.
Right.
Other things they do that mean something to people who don't come to the regular operas.
Right. See, to me, this there's two. If I think about households, and for the most part, the large symphonies in the United States have between 8,000 and 12,000 households they serve. In order to become more, and I mean as subscribers to their classical series, okay, which I would say that most orchestras believe is the sort of core product.
Yes.
If you say that we need to feed that more, we have to address the two fundamental problems that the orchestra has. One is exceedingly high retention problems, not retaining the level that they need to. And secondly, they need to create a feeding system that feeds either single ticket buyers or non-purchasers into a subscription process. Because the leverage in the orchestra comes from subscribers who contribute. That's where all the leverage is. There's no leverage in my mind anywhere else. So in my mind, this relates to how does, once an orchestra becomes part of the fabric, what they do is create conditions to feed the system. And we need to feed more and more people into this system right now because most orchestras have declining subscribers, number of subscriber households. And as a result, in order to turn that around, we need to have a very large number of people coming in. If you say that we have pretty much saturated the traditional group of attendees, we have no alternative but to become more diverse in terms of our contact.
It's wonderful that you're saying this,
Okay.
because I was going to ask you a question that's pretty inescapable, which is, you have been talking in terms of building up subscribers, building long-term relationships between people who are part of the audience of the orchestra and the orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you're aware that a large part of the orchestra world is or appears to be in the process of giving up on this. You really hear people saying, and I mentioned Jim Underkoffler from the Philadelphia Orchestra in the video interview I did with him yesterday here. He says, in effect, the subscription era is over, and we have to be selling single tickets.
Okay.
And then you have the very brave or the very foolish Pittsburgh Symphony, which still believes in the subscription model.
Yes.
And many people look at them and they raise their eyebrows. Now, I'll give you a very dramatic example. I can't name the orchestra, but I've seen some of their internal documents. It's a big orchestra, and they are projecting for future ticket sales, fewer and fewer sales to their core, and more sales to single ticket buyers who have never been before.
So let's look at the economics of this. Because to me, at one level, this is all about the money. I'm sorry, it's not all about the music, because we won't have any music.
Because you won't have music unless you have the money.
We won't have music if we don't get the money.
Yeah.
And most orchestras in this country are struggling around the money. And we can say all we want about the condition of the industry, but the orchestras that I have had relationships with, they're all struggling around money. And they continue to struggle every year around money. The facts are, from what I understand, is that between 50 and 70% of annual fund contributors are subscribers to a classical series. There are almost no contributions that come from single ticket buyers. So, in order to follow the path that our future is in single tickets, then we're going to have to do something extraordinary. We're going to have to figure out how to get single ticket purchasers to make significant contributions. I think that's a much tougher problem to solve than increasing the number of subscribers. Personally, I think it's a much tougher problem to solve because I don't have any commitment in those people. We know that from their behavior. So how do I get people who are basically uncommitted to contribute? I think
Probably
it's pretty
what
hard.
you need to do if you're going to follow that model is you have to develop new sources of money.
Absolutely.
So that you're not depending as much on donations from loyal subscribers. Now you're going to have to talk about more from corporations, from funding, from foundations, from government. But those sources are pretty well tapped out.
They're tapped out. So that leads to large endowments. And we know that there are some orchestras in this country that are chasing larger and larger endowments. And I believe that that's a necessary part of the formula. Except if we cannot build a greater level of commitment in the households we serve, in the communities we serve, I don't believe that any amount of endowment ultimately will solve the problem.
Okay. Now let me ask you what I think is a heartbreaking devil's advocate question.
Okay.
And it's a thought that I've been developing as we've talked about something that would be wonderful to see, Then I realized that it played directly into your idea of developing a wider constituency and having them be loyal to the orchestra. And then I wondered if it would be enough. So here it is.
Okay.
One of the most inspiring ideas for widening the reach of classical music that I've run into came from a pianist in North Carolina named Greg McCallum. He wasn't able to follow through this because he had some health issues that got in the way of the project, but he was set to bring his grand piano to every county in North Carolina, play concerts, do master classes, and also arrange concerts for any pianist who wanted to play those counties. So I think, what if the New York Philharmonic did that in New York City? The New York Philharmonic goes to the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem once a year, and with all respect to them, if they think this discharges their duty to New York's wider communities, that's a joke. But supposing they really developed a base in each borough of the city and neighborhoods they didn't go to. Now, I happen to know that Lincoln Center some years ago did an audience study in New York that revealed something absolutely fabulous that nobody has acted on, which is that there is a large potential audience for the performing arts made up of people who don't read the New York Times and therefore don't know what's going on and don't go to Lincoln Center in part because they have no idea what's being offered. So let's suppose that this is really true and that the Philharmonic therefore finds a much warmer reception and much more loyal reception in the boroughs than anybody might have expected in advance. And now here's my heartbreaking question. As they begin to develop supporters, Staten Island, in immigrant communities in Queens, in the depths of Brooklyn, and in the Bronx, are these people going to be able to give as much money as the traditional subscribers do? The ones who live in the fabled 10021 zip code, you know, the people who traditionally have been the ruling elite of New York. Are these people from the boroughs going to be able to give enough money to right the balance and make a difference?
I would imagine that the answer is probably no. That the large donors to both annual fund and to endowments are essential, and they're going to remain essential. That doesn't mean, though, that it's not necessary to find ways to have as many subscribers and attendees contribute to the institution. Because as things are today, probably 98% of attendees are subsidized by somebody or some organization. And I think that when that recognition is important for people to understand in terms of really judging the value of what they get, and it's one of the reasons why I think enhanced value is so critical, because I believe that if people really understood what it really costs to put a concert on, they would even see it having less value. And so to me, there is a real paradox here that in order to get those people to contribute the $10, $15, $100, $500, which do make a small impact on the overall funding, they have to also perceive that it's high value and that their money is not being wasted.
Here's how one way that you leverage this dream of going out into the neighborhoods of New York. You're asking people to support the institution. Well, what are they supporting? Oh, we give great concerts at Lincoln Center. We're internationally famous. We tour Europe and we get standing ovations. Okay, that's not a small thing. But how much better would it be if they said, and on top of that, we are beloved in the neighborhoods of New York City?
Well, this goes back to the point that we were talking about in terms of the orchestra being woven into the fabric of their community, because I think that we see enough evidence in terms of people's giving behavior in this country that when people value nonprofit institutions, even people with little money contribute to them. That's just part of our culture. So when when we end up not having that kind of relationship to a community, we are really foregoing and bypassing that potential that's out there. How big it is, I don't know, because I'm not sure that any orchestra has really tested this concept or idea very well.
They haven't. But do you know who has, in a certain way? The Metropolitan Opera. Mm-hmm. Because since Peter Gelb has taken over that institution, they are visible around New York in ways that they never were before, in part by putting a video screen in Times Square that showed, for anybody who wanted to come and watch, their opening night production, by going into movie theaters, not just in New York, but around the country and now internationally, by getting into the gossip columns, by having celebrities at their opening. They are now talked about. New York Magazine has sort of snarky feature called the approval matrix, where they slot different events on a scale of highbrow, lowbrow, brilliant, despicable. And the Met very often is getting into the highbrow, brilliant part of that. Right. And that gets people talking about them. That has led to all of these things together have led to an increase in ticket sales. I've heard the number is something like 10%. Right. The Met actually has advertised for the last week of the season that all the productions are sold out. Their ad in the Times says every single performance is sold out, so buy your tickets for next year. Right. This creating a buzz is worth its weight in diamonds for their future.
You know, and I think the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra is also, through its process of moving into the community in a more forceful way, having lower price subscriptions, encouraging people to donate the difference between old pricing and current. They have managed to transform people from single ticket buyers to subscribers who contribute. And to me, that is, you know, whether people believe that that's a path to success, I'm not sure there's another one that I've seen.
Right.
And so therefore, you know, in my mind, that model has got the highest economic leverage of any model I've yet looked at in terms of what can fund the industry.
And you know what else? I like it that we're ending on some high notes here. Yeah. I'm still thinking about my dream of the New York Philharmonic building bases in neighborhoods around the New York City. And so then I asked, well, are the people there going to be able to give as much money as the traditional donors? Let's not forget that there is money in minority communities. It's ridiculous to assume that the African American community, the Hispanic community, the Chinese community, the Korean community, that there aren't people with a lot of money there. But there is no way that they get woven into the fabric of the Philharmonic at this point. Right. So once you start doing these things, you open doors that whose value is incalculable.
You know, this to me, and I know we're sort of ending time-wise here, I guess there's one other thing I would add to this. I believe that these problems are so difficult and complex that they cannot be solved by staff groups alone. They can't be solved by a few musicians being involved in the ASOL. These problems must be solved at multiple levels and addressed. They have to be solved at a national level between the AFM, ASOL, and other organizations that operate nationally. They have to be solved at a community level. They have to be solved at a regional level. And that requires, in my view, a completely different relationship between musicians, boards, staffs, music directors, soloists, and the public. I don't think any of these problems are going to be solved by single orchestras trying to figure out a path that works for them.
And you know what a model here is for me? Global warming and the environment. Yeah. Everybody is now asking, what can I do? What can my company do? Right. And we're seeing wonderful solutions that individuals and companies do, even if it's just installing fluorescent lights instead of your incandescent ones. So, supposing all the orchestra constituencies that you were talking about start addressing what I see as a large cultural problem, and they are saying, our relationship to the community and the culture at large has to be different from what it was. Right. So now, You, Midori, are coming to be a soloist with us. What are you going to do? Actually, that's a good example because she does a great deal in the community.
Right.
But you ask that of everybody involved.
Absolutely.
And now you start finding some solutions,
Right.
and you begin transforming what you do. But you will not find the answer by just trying to tweak the conventional
Absolutely.
arrangements.
I agree. And in my mind, I don't think the solutions are known, but I don't think they will become known or found
until we start looking for them.
and until we
and
do
doing
it,
them.
and until we do it together.
Yes.
I mean, so if I were to leave on any note, the relationship at a local level, regional level, and national level, in my mind, has to change and be far more cooperative. We have to jointly approach this as though the field has significant problems that need to be solved by all of us together. And that's going to require sacrifice on some parties' parts, and it's going to require innovation on everybody's part. And I don't think otherwise that we're going to find a path that's going to address the kinds of topics we've talked about today.
And so on this note, we can end. I will look, instead of looking at you, I'm going to look at the camera, I'm going to look at the people who are watching this, and I'm going to say, what are you going to do?